design, architectural, aesthetic features as part of this and other things, because there's a lot of disjointed architecture, visual stuff, like up and down on Tenny Mountain High. We have a set of standards for, you know, everything that's been discussed here, and it can be tweaked up or it can be expanded or wherever, but primarily, we were not able during the site plan process to say you will have a neutral color, you will have a thus and such, you know. We were trying to get some sort of homogeneous, if it was going to fly, this would have been the opportunity to get the input and feedback, so that therefore the site plan regulations, which govern all this stuff, could be tightened up for specificity.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, I mean,
but not just for aesthetics.
No, it's not reactive at that point. There are stringent design regulations and stuff, plus all the permits and everything else.
Right. No, I understand that.
Okay.
I'm not confused about it, but I'm saying it seems that this is a juncture where we're sort of bantying about the environmentally sensitive nature of it, and now is the time, even though there are already existing buildings and lots of them, that now is the time to not only get ahead of the aesthetics, but try to get ahead of the far-ranging implications for our water supply and the land use.
Right. And that's where, you know, the engineering, the permitting and stuff like that, plus the awareness, but I mean, there are stringent standards certainly above ours. I mean, the board's, not mine.
So what I'm getting at, though, is
I understand what you're saying.
there is quite a bit of updating concerning traffic access. Is there going to be the same kind of updating, looking at the environmental impacts?
It would be peripheral to this, because what we're doing right here today is access management, and the components, the conversation that we've had about these different things, they're all components to it, but the major emphasis or the initiative or initiating emphasis is access management. And the other issues are very important, but they're somewhat secondary to it.
Well, I'm wondering,
in this process.
Is there a plan? I'm wondering, is there another plan? Is there another process? Is there something else moving forward to unite these two into a vision for Tenny Mountain Highway?
Well, that would be looked at the master plan update level. This is just one small component that we realized wasn't current at all. So we had to start with A to get to B. That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Kemp.
David Kent from Plymouth. I'd like to pick up on a remark that John Kelly made at the previous meeting, where he said, wouldn't it be good if there was some sort of a checklist that the developer could have and know that what they want to do could get approved without new things just piling on over time. Well, there is such a way of doing those kinds of things, but it requires regulation, and the culture has been sort of against the notion of regulation. But regulation actually makes it easier for a developer rather than harder. Regulation actually raises property values rather than drop them. Regulation prevents mixed uses instead of and creates conformity, and that's one of the things you're talking about tonight is conformity. Without regulation, you leave people to their own wish or the bargaining power, and that's, I think, what Bill Hoole was talking about, the bargaining power that the planning board can bring to an approval process rather than have it up front. This is what we expect of you. If we expect a parallel road to the highway, look, it's a regulation that we have to try to enforce, and here's how we're going to do it. So I would urge that if we want to minimize mixed uses, or minimize the lack of conformity, or minimize negative externalities, how one property negatively affects another one, that we create some certainty. And the way to do that is with some just clear regulations that people can follow. And that can be part of this process. You people are responsible for zoning changes or for planning board rules that you people operate under. And you certainly can do that. And I would just say that although it seems counterintuitive to a lot of people, it does raise property values. When you do things right, everybody benefits. It isn't just a matter of taking rights away from someone. Actually, everybody benefits when you regulate sensibly. The master plan certainly would look at those kinds of issues. I'd also ask you to take a look at, while you're doing this, the fact that you've got a whole bunch of bordering land on the north side, which is an environmental bit of a problem, and on the south side, which butts up to a large extent to the agricultural zone, which for all practical purposes is pretty unregulated in terms of what people can do there. You have to start thinking broader about how can we make things easier for the developer, how can we make things better for the taxpayer. So that's what I've got to offer tonight. Design standards and conformity require regulation, and don't be fearful of it. It's a good thing, not a bad thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kemp. Yes.
Russ Harris, Harris Furniture. As far as development that's going to be going on, out on the highway, I mean, it's not cookie cutter. The properties out there are not cookie cutter. So, I mean, what might be best use for one property is not the best use for the other property. So I think, it's important, if you want to have something for aesthetics, dark star lighting, or, that type of stuff for the properties. I think there's some items that are cookie cutter that you might be able to solve here tonight, but I think there's other things for the individual properties. I think, you need to leave it up to the engineers and the experts, and they have to meet certain regulations. If they don't, as far as with the water treatment and that stuff. So just each property is not cookie cutter, so you can't have the same for one as you can the other. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, Mr. Hood.
Phil Hu. Again, I want to go back to the prior study, and just to clarify further for Mary, when we applied for funds to do that study, and we applied twice, we were successful on the second occasion. It was conditioned upon it being a semi-regional study, and Romney was included to be a participant in that study if they were willing to do so. And when we structured that study, we put out specific invitations to all the property owners that abutted either side of Tenny Mountain Highway. And the majority of those property owners that were in the community did afford the opportunity to meet and discuss what was under consideration on any given evening. And as far as the results of that study and the document that came out of it, it isn't current to today's situation, I certainly agree with. But in its fundamental basis, it is structurally sound and a good core document to work from and to fine-tune. I would point out to you that there's been a lot of development that has occurred since that document was formulated. The document at the time that it was prepared was supported by extensive traffic studies. We have more traffic counts going on in this town to determine the movement of traffic within the community from the village as well as down Tenny Mountain Highway or interconnecting roadways. And that was good data, and data that this town didn't really have before that study. Today, those traffic patterns have been slightly altered because of the development that has occurred around the town. So as a part of updating, you want to get, with the help of the state, new traffic counts and get a current understanding of flows and directions that your traffic is flowing in. As it comes to regulations and architectural design standards and what have you, I have this to say. I personally feel that this town over the last 10 years, has amended its regulations to the extent that you have a very adequate set of regulatory ground rules to conduct your planning board function from. More regulation is more a detriment than an asset when it comes to attracting development in the community. As far as what has happened in the way of development since that study was done, now I may be repetitious of some of what was said at your last meeting, and I apologize for that. The direction of development has been commercially oriented along the artery and off Boulder Point Road, with a little more focused, medically oriented activity up on Boulder Point. But there is about another 250 acres of property up there that is ripe for development, and within the next 10 years, you're going to see a big change beyond what you see now. And I think as a community, that whole corridor and those offshoots from that corridor are what you would call commercially oriented development sites, for the fact that there are very different geometries associated with all of those different properties. They're not cookie cutter, as Russ pointed out. And as to the notion of attracting industrial development as opposed to commercial enterprise, we've gone through that. Back in the 90s and early 2000, there was a large area currently occupied by Walmart that was an industrial development site. For all the effort that that group of people made to try and attract industry to that site, they were unsuccessful. Since then, we've lost the peg mill, we lost Hitchner, Sprague before that. We have no industry per se of a manufacturing or a highly skilled labor force oriented industry. And I have to tell you, we're not going to have such an industry in this community because regionally we do not have the labor market skills to support such an industry. If it's high tech and something that is related to the now communications systems that we have, yes, you might be able to attract some small businesses that would employ maybe 20 to 30 employees in support of their particular product interest or service interest. But the notion that we can attract industry and get high-tech manufacturing jobs of any sort is a myth. It isn't going to happen. And you have to orient your direction as a planning board in looking with the tools that you have and the common sense that you embody to work with each site proposal that comes forward and use the basic regulations, master plan, corridor studies to integrate all that information to make the most sensible proposal that you can from any developer that's attracted to the artery. And I can only say that history has shown that the planning board does have a lot of negotiating strength with a major developer if they want to assert that negotiating strength, as was done for Walmart, as was done for Lowe's when they were proposing to build on a site, and equally when Midstate Medical Center was proposing to develop their site. So you have the tools that you need to do the job you're statutorily responsible to do without more regulation.
Thanks, Bob. Anybody else that would like to speak on design? Yes, Brian?
Brian Murphy. I noticed there was talk of dark skies compliance. Many communities have adopted the dark skies ordinance, which is in a million websites if anybody wanted to read it up. However, the planning board itself, without any force of law behind them, have asked developers to be compliant with dark skies, and the developers have all agreed. Most people do it just because. Things are designed now to make them downcast lighting is cheaper, and you know, there's a whole bunch of factors. People are beginning to realize that the dark skies are very important. You know, I came from Los Angeles, so I know the whole story. So, and I really enjoy the dark skies here. However, there are certain entities that are exempt from any of those regulations, and primarily among them are individual residents. So in my capacity here at the town, I've heard a lot of complaints from people who their neighbor has put up a light off of the telephone pole, and no matter how the co-op tries to angle it, they still get light on their property. So, and they're speaking, you know, they moved here for the dark skies, and suddenly that's the problem. You know, and I think without actually adopting the ordinance, you're already enforcing the ordinance, the dark skies ordinance, by asking commercial developments to the best of your ability to do this. To try and here's where you're kind of in a quandary, because you can adopt rules for development at the planning board level as long as they jive with state and local zoning. But some of the things that we've discussed tonight can't be accomplished by planning board edicts. It would have to actually go to the legislative body for voting on the zoning ordinance. And, you know, that could be tricky. I mean, you know, the people will vote as they vote, you know, and then we have to stay within that, which is fine. But it's just not as easy when you come out of the planning board and put it out to the general public. You know, it's almost the law of unintended consequences. You'll never know what you're going to get back when you put something on the polls. And then we're all bound by that one way or the other. So I think, you know, for purposes of this, I don't know what regulations would be possible to be done. I'm sure there are some that can be stronger than the planning board rules of procedure and the checklists that you have, but fail to rise to the severity of zoning ordinance. A lot of that, I think, has to be done in conversation with the developers, so that when they're initially looking at it, they can see their plan and say, hey, you know, if we approached our neighbor to the west, maybe we could hook in there, get one less curb cut, or be able to drop off the left turn arrow from our signal that we're going to have to put in. If I'm clear. Okay. That's about it. You know, it's a tough nut to crack, is all I'm saying. There's a lot of interest involved. There's tools that the town can use to promulgate development in spots. There again, that goes to the legislative body. If they feel that, for whatever reason, somebody's trying to pull a fast one, they'll shoot it down. In other ways, you can do things that don't carry the force of law, but that it's an agreement between the developers, the town, and going forward. Tools are there, like everybody's been saying tonight. Thanks.
I think a couple of people, Maggie's brought it up, and a couple others have. If it's not a regulation, that it might just fall by the wayside, and the planning board changes, and next thing you know, you get different members, and it doesn't, no one follows through. Yes, Mr. Kemp.
While you're on the topic of regulations, there's a level at which the planning board negotiating becomes arbitrary and capricious against a developer.
Becomes what?
Arbitrary and capricious. You're trying to do something about which you have no power to do. And the developer you can get pushback. So that's one comment. Second comment about industrial growth. Federal government with the university is building a business development center here. If Littleton can build out a an industrial park, Laconia can build out an industrial park, Plymouth can build out an industrial park. There's going to be better jobs, better pay. Those employment opportunities are better than you're going to find in many of the commercial and retail outlets that we have. I said that last time, and I would simply reiterate that. Thank you.
Charlie Crane, Plymouth resident. I know design standards and engineering best practices are evolving entities. I want to point to a Science News article within the last year, I think it was called Extreme Weather, pointing out that what we used to think of as a 100-year storm is now becoming much more likely within every 20 years. We're seeing 5 of those major events in a 100-year, it's looking like that kind of thing. So when we're thinking in terms of that's an extreme event and we really shouldn't burden the planning process too much with consideration of what might happen in a flood, the floods are going to be really inevitable. My argument.
Thank you. Yes, Paul.
Well, if I might, just another observation, if I could. I think most people realize that the Tenny Mountain corridor that's running down through there, most of the land that's on Tenny Mountain Highway itself, nobody who wants to put an industrial plant is going to buy that land. Not at probably $5,000 or $10,000 an acre, or even higher than that. Probably most of those parcels out there are going for $500 to $1 million. Who's going to put a plant out there when they can buy land somewhere else in town for probably, you know, 100, 200, 300, 400? I don't know what the land's going for, but cost per acre is going to be a big issue. Location is going to be a big issue. As far as regulation goes, I seem to recall that when Walmart was put in here, the planning board had quite a bit of leverage with Walmart. As a matter of fact, they decided that they didn't like the color of the building, as a matter of fact, to the point where it was that gray, garish-looking color that was in many of the communities. They said, no, you know, we really would appreciate it if you would come up with a different color that the town, that might fit in aesthetically a little better with the town. And guess what? They came up with another color that was aesthetically pleasing. Signage, good example, right on the highway. You don't see one of those big garish signs. You see a small sign that says Walmart's up here, and that's where you go. So I think the planning board has enough power to do what it needs to do, but at this point I don't believe they have too much power. And I think what I've seen of the planning board over the years, they've used it wisely and they've done a good job. And my hat's off to all of you on the planning board.
Anyone else? Yes.
I used to have a little printing business, and every Tuesday morning at 8:45, there was this woman who would come, and she was about 87 years old. She was about this tall. She had bright, bright blue eyes. And she always bought between 10 cents and 30 cents worth of copies, and then she went away, and then she would come back, you know, like clockwork. So this had gone on for probably about a year, when one Tuesday morning I said, you know, I can set my clock by you. And she gave me this brilliant smile and these bright blue eyes, and she said, my structure is my freedom. And I have never forgotten it. Whether we have any new regulations, we have zoning regulations which, if they are followed carefully, evenly, we'd be in very good shape. I'm not keen on design police. I think telling other people what they should like is a pretty tricky business. I wouldn't appreciate it if someone told me what they thought my building should look like, and I'm not very keen on telling someone else what. I don't particularly care for the new McDonald's building, but it's none of my business if they want to have a building that looks like that. There it is, opened up today. It's got sparkly big balloons. What something looks like isn't the issue. Where something is, whether or not we are squandering important aspects of environmental protection and You know, I can't tell you how many times I've heard either a select board member or a planning board member say to me, well, we don't have a lake. Plymouth doesn't have a lake. We have two beautiful rivers. And one of them runs along the Tenny Mountain Highway. We might keep that in mind. The Tenny Mountain Corridor Study talks about a preference to keep the land along the Baker River for recreation and specifically not for commercial use. So just, you know, we have the advice we need, we have the wisdom we need, we have regulations we can follow, and that would be a good thing to do, because our structure is our freedom.
So at the last meeting, if we're done on that, the last meeting I did mention that if there was time, that we could revisit the prior two topics. And I
Not for redundancy.
And I know that there was quite a bit of talk about a couple issues as we were leaving. But I don't mind revisiting it if it could be new information. I don't want to just sit here to rehash. We've already got the notes from the prior meeting. So if there's something new that you would like to talk about, land use
And transportation.
and transportation, I'd be willing to open it up and listen.
I just want to follow up what Bill said. As everybody knows here, I'm definitely against roundabouts, but everything else here has been just money, funding. Everybody's broke, but everybody wants a project. So I can't for the life of me to see why the state of New Hampshire would want to put a roundabout in there when the wires are already there, everything is there for the set of lights. One more set of lights on this road is not going to make any difference. And people coming from off Smith Bridge Road, like Dick Piper stuff, are not going to go around the roundabout like Mr. Hanston said last week, you know, Hanscom, whatever his name is. You know, they could make it bigger. You're going to take more property, you're going to do this and that. A lot more money is being spent. With the infrastructure of this whole state is so bad, along with every other state in the union, you know, why blow the money there when you could put it into a bridge? I mean, the federal government's blowing a lot of money from from traffic circle up. And, you know, it's just not feasible. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Anyone else that would like to revisit last week's topics?
Did anybody talk about the pedestrian crossings on Tenny Mountain Highway at the end of the meeting? Okay.
I said it too.
And I did.
Yeah, Frank.
I think the one thing that's discussion of this study and everything, I believe we need to really inventory the landowners who own the lots on the south side of Tenny Mountain Highway and see what's in their plans of what they envision to use or not use their property for. Otherwise, we can just be sitting around with academic discussion about this, and I feel kind of out there talking about what could or could not be on someone else's property, when in fact, if somebody is looking to continue the development of Boulder Drive and that acreage, which I don't even know how much there is, we might look to see what we can do to facilitate and assist if they so are inclined to have that developed. If we've got property owners out there that like the trees the way they are, it's going to be tough sledding to try to legislate something to be done there. So I think we ought to inventory the landowners and see what they have for.
All right, thank you, Frank. Anything else new? Yes.
I'm Bill Harris, and I'm with Harris Family Furniture. I wouldn't like to see a divide in the road where you couldn't go right, where you couldn't go left.
Would not?
I would not like to see any
Median.
median in the road. I'd like to have free access to go right or left on Tenny Mountain as we do today. Thank you.
So you're talking about a raised median or?
A raised median or
Or a solid.
or a solid one. Mhm.
Yes, Mr. Wood?
Moon Lake. Isn't that inside Plymouth?
I believe it is.
Some people are saying we don't own a lake.
I know they do, they say it, John.
Huh?
It is said.
I've got a good advertisement. Come to Plymouth, free blinking lights. They blink all the time. We'll find you the land, but at least you got the blinking lights.
Anything else before we?
On the roundabout over here, when you came to the organizational meetings, I asked the question, how many signs? Oh, there won't be any more than 4 or 5 signs. Last time I counted, there was 20-some odd signs down there. And it's nice when you're going behind somebody and all of a sudden they stop and they're looking around, seeing where the hell they want to go, with no direction whatsoever. So too many regulations cause a lot of trouble. As we know now with red, white, and blue center lines in our streets.
That's correct.
But if they've got the money, let's talk to them. Let them come, propose what they want, and be done with it. You've got to let people come in here that are gonna put money in our pockets. Not mine, but the people that already got money. A good example is up on Highland Street where the Forest Service was. They came with about 40 people to clean up that site. And you'd swear that nobody's been there. It's a disaster area. Now why aren't they held so they have to clean up and leave it looking like it's respectable? Over here in front of our little diamond where it's been brought up twice with the select board. No signs. They're too dangerous to cars and everything else, and yet there's always signs there saying a Christmas party or a concert or this or that. Nobody says a word, yet it's been brought up and been authorized by the selectmen that they can't have them there. There's no enforcement for a lot of the things the planning board is doing. Like, why should the state have the right to tell the town, you can't do this or you can do this? People are pretty limited in what they can do around Plymouth with construction and buildings and everything else, unless they go on the, is it north or south? The south side. That's the place to build, right? But it's all ledge. The amount of money it costs to put stuff up there is not what people want to pay today. But we're trying to force them up there. I don't know why. Can anybody tell me? Think of what it costs for water, sewer, and everything else to go up into that area. Probably triple what it does on the south side. I don't know. It's a no-win situation. So what do? You say, if you've got the money, come. If you don't, don't. But we still got the blinking lights costing the
What
town.
is the blinking light about?
You don't know? You go by it every day?
There's one at the high school. There's one at the end of our driveway coming out of Hitchner Road.
Yeah. That's 3 lights right there.
Yeah, that's 2 lights, John. The one at the high school and one at the end of Hitchner is 2.
It's not part of the Tenny Mountain corridor study,
Yeah, I don't,
so we need to move forward.
That's not part of the
Anything
thing.
else?
No, it isn't.
When will notes be available and in what format?
There are draft minutes transcribed, but they're draft. They have to be gone over for just, matching names.
right.
And this, signs the transcription is here's
When
a
will the
20-year-old.
minutes?
It's a 5-day,
On the
it's,
website, or-
Pardon?
Are they posted on the town website?
They should be from the last meeting, but it's a 5-day, 5-business day statutory timeframe for draft minutes.
Mr. King?
I would hope that at least one thing that would come out of this is a fairly immediate view of what's going to happen with the width of Tenny Mountain Highway. Because that's something you're going to have to tell developers as they come along. It's either going to stay the way it is with side access roads, or it's going to get wide, or something's going to happen. I think the quicker you get, people can make up your mind on that sort of thing, the better off the town.
We want limited harassment.
Any comments, John, on that?
The reality is that it's a state road, and if the state decides they want to put, another lane in, or put it into 2 lanes, that's not, I think you can weigh in as a town, but in a lot of it, a lot of the traffic is being generated by what happens out there, so it's sort of you guys control what's happening, and the state responds by making geometric changes out there, so I think if there's lane additions, or, someone mentioned, you mentioned you don't want a median strip, go down to Plastow on Route 125, and there's a median strip that runs right down the middle of the road, because they got too congested, and that was the state's response. I don't think Tenny Mountain Highway is ever going to get to that point, but, that the state will do what they have to do to keep traffic flowing. The best thing that you can hope for is to work with the DOT when these applicants come in and try to work out something that's
Which we do, to have homogeneous slip lanes, turn lanes, not just, isolated as a purview.
Well,
Question for you. When we did the earlier study, we had the district engineer and a member of the DOT planning department participating in those discussions so that we could address the issue of highway width.
He was here last time. Alan Hanscom was here.
So if he's not a participant, he certainly should be, particularly as you start to integrate the information that you have to get his input, and maybe that of one of the planners from down in Concord.
Dean?
Speaking of the state and town, but has it been brought up that they're going to try to downsize the traffic circle of West Plymouth? I mean, that flow of traffic working fine there, but now the state's talking about downsizing because they said there's too many wrecks. I mean, people run yields fine, yes, but I don't see any wrecks there. It's, and it works like everything works good.
I haven't heard.
Well, it was mentioned in conversation, Mr. Hanscom brought it up.
That night, yeah.
Well, I was talking with some of the boys out of Runby State Shed, and they said, they talk about downsizing. And some of these guys that plow snow said, if you will plow a roundabout, I said, oh, we don't want one. He said, we don't either.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming out tonight. Appreciate all your comments, and the planning board's got a lot of work to do. Motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn, second. Mr. Kelly,